My team won a game against another school team today. I was able to score 2 goals. I felt truly happy. But then I realized that no one was listening to me. My parents didn't care. They didn't even look at me. All their attention was devoted to my pregnant sister. Hi, my name is Tyler. I'm 16. And before I start my story, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I was in my room doing homework when I suddenly heard cries of outrage. When I went down to the first floor, I found a big family argument. What pregnancy? You're only 22 years old. You have to study. Please let me speak. For the first time in months, I saw my sister Amanda, not in baggy clothes. Her rounded belly was clearly visible from under the t-shirt. This is my boyfriend's baby. We've been dating for several years. He's studying at Yale University, and when he found out about the baby, he proposed to me. The parents changed in a blink of an eye. A groom who studied at the most prestigious university in the US is a great success. The fight was over. Mom rushed to ask Amanda's feelings, and Dad went to the kitchen to make her tea. The next morning, I didn't wake up from the alarm clock as usual. Wake up! We are leaving for work, and you need to make your sister breakfast. She must rest. Hardly knowing what I was doing, I trudged to the kitchen, and when the scrambled eggs were ready, Amanda didn't even want to come to the table. I had to bring the plate to the couch where she was lying wrapped in a blanket and carelessly watching Netflix. After school, I was going to have training as usual when I got a message from my mom. Go home, it's urgent. Terrified, I said goodbye to my friends and rushed home. On the way home, I was going to worry myself and go through a bunch of versions of what could have happened. A fire, a thief got into the house, a pipe burst. I broke into the house and found my sister on the couch, in the same position I left her in the morning. Mom said you need to cook dinner and help me with the laundry because it's hard for me to bend over. I love my sister, but at that moment, a grin froze on her face, and she seemed to me the most evil creature on the planet. From that moment, the situation in the family began to deteriorate rapidly. A month later, a game took place, for which I had been preparing for half a year. I played it nicely, but looking at the stands, I realized that my parents never came to see me. Later, I tried to talk about my success at dinner, but no one listened to me again. As soon as I opened my mouth, Mom and Dad immediately interrupted me. How are you feeling? Don't you feel sick? Or maybe instead of a white wedding dress, buy a champagne one. Shall we decorate the tables with hydrangeas or roses? All the chores that Amanda used to do were dumped on me, and the wedding was another huge problem. Everyone was talking about it. The endless attempts to choose a dress infuriated me the most. My sister had probably already seen about 100 options and still could not decide. I was sitting in the lobby and playing games when I heard my mother's voice. Tyler, come here. I need you to hold the hem of the dress. Well, no, thanks. I felt like an outsider at this celebration of life. I didn't want to see anyone, so I slipped out of the store and went to a cafe on the first floor, and then I saw her. Shiny hair, magical eyes, a happy smile. She was sitting there at the next table, and I've never seen a prettier girl ever. For the next 10 minutes, I tried to persuade myself to come over and get to know her. I was quaking in excitement, and when I finally was up, I realized she had already gone. There was no one at the table. From that moment on, I couldn't think of anyone else but her. How I wanted to go back in time to that cafe and ask her name. I dreamed about a beautiful stranger so often that at some point I almost went crazy. She walked into our classroom and I jumped, surprised. Am I imagining things now? It took me some time to figure it out. She was real and a new student at our school. Her name was Esther, and I took my chance. Hi, have you been to the doctor recently? Because I suppose you lack vitamin me. In response, she looked at me like I was an idiot. Then she laughed and left without saying anything. And I made a decision never to use advice from the internet again. I came home in a terrible mood. I was only thinking about how to please Esther and everyone around. As luck would have it, couldn't leave me alone. In the evening, the sister's fiance was finally supposed to arrive to meet his future parents-in-law. When we sat down at the table, Amanda looked very excited, constantly checking her phone, and then she suddenly stopped smiling abruptly. He wrote that he would not be able to come. He's busy with studies. Parents were very upset, and for the rest of the evening, Amanda sat with tears in her eyes and was silent. Despite being asked constantly, I was still thinking about Esther. How can she like me? I was wondering until late night, and I couldn't sleep for a long time. In the end, I got up and went to my sister's room. I was still mad at Amanda, but she was a girl and probably knew what other girls liked. I raised my hand to knock on the door, and then I heard a voice. "I do not know what to do. I can't go on like this anymore." My sister was talking to someone on the phone and crying so bitterly that I could hardly hear her. Who does he think he is? I felt sorry for my sister, so much so that I decided to call him the next day to tell him how ugly he was acting. He left his pregnant fiance and never showed up. However, when I asked Amanda for his phone number, she refused to give it to me. But I wasn't going to give up so easily. Yale University was in a nearby town, a couple of hours away. I collected all my savings and bought a bus ticket. When I got to the administration building and tried to find the guy, they told me that there was no such student there. I had messed up something. Feeling helpless, I called my sister. But as soon as I told her where I was, she started yelling, "Mind your business! I can't talk to you right now. Go home!" She hung up, and I had no choice but to obey. I had to walk from the station because I ran out of money. At some point, I saw a couple in a dark alley. I felt envy unwittingly and, of course, recalled Esther. But when I almost passed by, I heard, "Leave me alone! Don't touch me!" I rushed there and pushed the guy away from the girl. "Get out of here! Can't you see she doesn't want to talk to you?" Fortunately, the stranger did not argue, and the girl clung to me like a defender and whispered softly in my ear, "Thanks." She smelled delicious flowers and apples, and when we came out of the dark alley, I was speechless. It was Esther. The girl looked surprised for a few seconds and then smiled sweetly at me. "Will you walk me home, please? I had a very bad date." I couldn't refuse, and we walked several blocks talking. At parting, she hugged me and kissed me on the cheek. I returned home with the feeling that my heart had wings. My sister's fiance completely slipped my mind. The next day, my parents made me go to the hospital with Amanda. We got into the elevator, but before it could move, there was a terrible rumble. Stuck. The emergency service technician said that we would have to wait 15 minutes until the problem was fixed. There was nothing to do, so I started asking my sister about her fiance. With each new question, she looked sadder and sadder. And then, finally, she couldn't stand it. "There is no groom. I imagined everything so that my parents wouldn't yell at me. Got pregnant by accident. We do not communicate with the father of the child." When we finally got out of the elevator and the nurse left for an exam, I rushed to the phone. Here is my chance. If my parents find out the truth, they will stop fussing with Amanda like that and start paying attention to me again. I had already typed a message and raised my finger over the send button when the doctor called me into the office. I went in, and on the black and white screen, I saw a tiny child with arms and legs. My sister was crying, and I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. "Congratulations! It's a girl," said the doctor. I was smiling. After that, I erased the message and realized I couldn't do that to my sister. Later, Esther and I went for a walk. I held her hand, but couldn't stop thinking about my sister. In the end, he couldn't stand it and shared what had happened with my family recently. "Why don't you and your sister come to dinner with us? It will be useful for her to meet new people." After a short pause, she said, and I agreed. Esther's family turned out to be cool. Her mom, dad, and older brother gathered at the table. They were polite, considerate, and talked very warmly to Amanda. But to be honest, I couldn't wait to be alone with Esther. After dinner, I took her by the hand and led her to the backyard. "What are you doing? I didn't let her finish. Hugged and kissed her, feeling that she was smiling. I wanted this moment to last forever. But we were interrupted by voices. Frightened, I pulled Esther into the bushes. And then we saw Amanda and Esther's older brother walking slowly around the house. Months passed by. I was still loaded with all the chores, but I put up with that because I sympathized with my sister and wanted to help. My parents decided to have dinner again to finally meet the groom, and even I was terribly worried. How would Amanda get out of that? Everything was ready. The doorbell rang. I went to open the door and saw Steve? When Amanda came out, he put his arm around her and kissed her on the cheek. Although I was very surprised, I did not comment on it in any way. What if Amanda paid him to play the role of her fiance? I didn't want to accidentally reveal them in front of my parents. Dinner was awesome. Parents were completely delighted with Steve. Amanda was all glowing with happiness. At some point, she went into the kitchen to bring dessert, and we all heard, "It's time! I'm in labor!" Together, we rushed to the hospital. Worried, I was sitting under the door of the ward. We were allowed to go inside only a few hours later. In Amanda's arms was a tiny girl wrapped in swaddling clothes. Steve picked her up and looked at her with adoration. And then he looked at my sister with love, and I finally understood everything. Later, Amanda started to walk more and was having fun. It looks like she didn't pay Steve. They just fell in love with each other. The guy wasn't even confused by the child. Looking at my niece and parents, my sister, Steve, I suddenly felt incredibly happy. I was glad that everything turned out that way and no longer felt excluded. My sister really needed help. My parents were right there. I also realized that I was ready to continue caring for both Amanda and her daughter because we are a family and I love them very much.